Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jared Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum. Hey, just a couple quick notes here before we get to this episode of the matchup. Number one, apologize for my voice, fighting a bit of a cold, so that's why I sound a little bit different. Also want to just let you know that the audio you're about to hear with Ben and Seth previewing IU Duke, it's not great, it's not ideal. Ben and Seth both home over the Thanksgiving weekend, so they didn't have their normal microphones and equipment. So this doesn't sound as good as it normally does, but their analysis is good. We thought it was useful, so we're going to play it, let you listen to it, but just know, again, it's not the greatest audio. So just kind of know that going into it. But anyway, without further ado, here is this week's episode of The Matchup. Alex and I will be back later this week, probably Wednesday, with your weekly, regularly scheduled Podcast on the Brink episode talking about IU Duke. But before the game, here is some insight from Ben and Seth to get you ready for Tuesday night. Here we go.
Hello and welcome to another episode of The Matchup. I'm Ben Ladner, joined by Seth Tao over the phone. We are not under ideal podcast circumstances this evening. We're recording this around 8:45 on Sunday night, a couple days before Indiana takes on Duke. Seth is joining us over the phone. The audio quality, as you will hear when he speaks, is not as it normally is, but we're going to make it work, and I think things are coming through all right.
The show must go on.
Yeah, so hopefully we can brave these minor technical difficulties and still give a good substantive preview of what's to come against Duke as Indiana travels to Cameron Indoor Stadium in Durham on Tuesday. And, you know, safe to say that this is the biggest matchup for Indiana all season long, at least to date, and possibly for the entire season. Marquette and Arkansas, good as they may be, don't quite measure up to the Duke Blue Devils, especially this year's version of the Duke Blue Devils, who, despite losing to Gonzaga a couple days ago, remain one of the best and most talented teams in America and a viable threat to win the championship this year.
Right. Duke is the closest thing college basketball has to a super team this year, with three top recruits in R.J. Barrett, Zion Williamson, and Cam Reddish. And it's especially scary for Indiana knowing that Duke basically had a week to prepare for this coming off of that Gonzaga loss. Indiana had the UC Davis game on Friday before the Duke game, but after Duke lost to Gonzaga, their next opponent is Indiana.
Yeah, so I think the obvious place to start here is just maybe defensive matchups, just kind of going through and looking at who on Indiana might guard those big three of Duke, like you mentioned. So Zion Williamson, R.J. Barrett, and Cam Reddish being kind of their three stars. I think the place to start is with Zion Williamson, and I would imagine that Juwan Morgan gets the assignment there, at least from the jump, but I could also see Justin Smith taking on that matchup. Yeah,
interesting, because when I was going through this, I put Justin Smith on him, figuring that Morgan may draw the Marcus Bolden assignment.
Yeah, no, I think that's a good point, and I also, we talked about this when we did kind of our full season preview, just about Juwan Morgan is maybe Indiana's most important offensive player, and so do you really want to put him on Zion Williamson, who's going to take a lot out of him defensively, when you have Justin Smith, who, I mean, there are very few people, if anyone, who can match Zion Williamson's athletic combination of fluidity and explosiveness, but Justin Smith comes pretty dang close, at least, you know, as far as a college player goes. So I actually think that is a fairly natural matchup, and the more I think about it, the more sense it makes that Justin Smith be the guy that takes on that assignment, just because he's big. He's, 6'7", 230, which granted is not as big as Zion Williamson, who is 6'7", 285, but, kind of equivalent explosiveness and at least vertical explosiveness. And I think Justin Smith is probably a little bit better athlete than Juwan Morgan. And again, not a guy you're asking to do a whole lot on the offensive end, so he can afford to expend more energy on defense, while you can let Juwan Morgan take on Marquise Bolden, who is a decent player in his own right, but definitely not quite the caliber of a Zion Williamson.
Right, and I mean, even just size-wise, matching up Smith and Williamson, I mean, Smith is probably the best choice there, given the way that Williamson can just flat out get up.
Yeah.
Smith is really Indiana's only match for him in that sense, and just with his vertical, with his Justin Smith's insane vertical, but also just his arm length and his calf strength.
Yeah. And also the upper body strength, I think, is important because Duke might feel, and rightfully, might feel like that with Zion Williamson, they have an advantage in the post against pretty much anyone that they play because he's just so big, he's so powerful. And so it's, Juwan Morgan's a strong dude, but I don't think he's quite as cut or as muscular as Justin Smith. Now, Smith, I think at times has struggled playing with physicality, or at least the kind of physicality that you would expect from someone with his physical gifts. So that's going to be a challenge for him. I think just, mentally and physically preparing himself to kind of bang inside and really take that beating and that bruising is something that he's not always welcomed in his career. So that's going to be something that he's going to be asked to do a lot in this game. And, it's worth wondering whether he can really sustain that for an entire game, be it 30 minutes, 35, or, high 20s minutes over the course of a full game.
Right, yeah, that's kind of an area that when we looked at Justin Smith heading into the season, that's kind of an area that people were kind of hoping he would take a step forward in, just being a little more willing to be more physical and more aggressive inside. That in addition to developing the outside shot, but for this matchup, obviously, we're talking about him just being aggressive on defense and playing physical. And we haven't, and granted, in fairness, he hasn't really faced the type of matchup that would necessitate him to do that yet. But so this will be a good test to see if he's really going to take a step forward this year in that respect.
Yeah, and we saw him get benched in that Arkansas game in the second half because, we never got like a full explanation as to why that was, but it was apparently because, Archie Miller just felt like he wasn't really bringing it physically and was playing a little bit soft. And so at least that's how it appeared to me. So yeah, this is definitely going to be a physical challenge for Justin Smith. He's usually the most athletic guy on the floor by a long shot, and in this game, he's going up against the most athletic player in college basketball. So that's going to be a really unique challenge for him. And just worth noting, Zion Williamson's numbers this season, averaging just under 21 points and 10 rebounds with over 2 assists per game on 67.7 true shooting percentage, which takes into account threes and free throws and kind of combines it into one efficiency metric. So he's just absolutely dominating. He's scoring in a variety of ways.
Yeah.
He's getting to the basket. He's catching lobs. He's getting out in transition, getting to the free throw line, making free throws. He's just doing everything for this Duke team.
Yeah, a couple other stats I have on him. He's 10th in the country in offensive rebounds per game. So that's Justin Smith is going to have to really work hard on the defensive glass because Williamson can really have an impact there. He's averaging over 4 offensive rebounds per game. That's just offensive rebounds per game. There are players that don't even average 4 rebounds a game. And he's 4th in the country, in efficiency rating.
Yeah.
Which, he's a really, really tough player to defend.
Yeah, and not only will it be incumbent upon Justin Smith and Juwan Morgan and De'Ron Davis when he's in the game to keep him off the boards, but I think also Indiana's guards are really going to have to help out in that respect, where you're probably going to need to put multiple bodies on him to keep him off the glass at times, and you're really going to need all 5 guys to go to the boards. I think Indiana wants to get out in transition. They want to play fast. They want those easy scoring opportunities. But if it comes at the cost of giving up 1 million offensive rebounds to a really athletic team, I don't think that's a deal or a gamble that they're willing to take. So I think you're going to see a lot of Indiana just sending all 5 guys to the defensive glass on every possession, just making sure that Duke can't get those extra opportunities because Zion Williamson and Cam Reddish, who we'll talk about in a little bit, but this whole team really, they've got the guys who can beat you and who can do it efficiently. So if you give them extra possessions, whether it be 3, 4, 5, 6 offensive rebounds per game, that's a lot of potential points that you're leaving on the table. And against a team like Duke, you can't really afford to play with that kind of deficit.
Yeah, right. And not to mention the fact that Duke has kind of looked Michigan-esque so far this season in how they don't really turn the ball over. Yeah. They're only averaging like 10 turnovers a game. So when you combine that with the number of offensive rebounds they're able to get, that's just a lot of extra possessions.
And I think that also ties in with what I kind of touched on earlier about Indiana wanting to play in transition. You know, so much of their defense and really in turn their offense is predicated on forcing turnovers, you know, getting a steal around midcourt and just getting easy buckets in transition. And if you're playing a team that doesn't turn the ball over very often, obviously that's going to cut down on your opportunities to do that. And so that's a good note that you make, because to see that out of such a young team where, you know, the 4 guys who are handling the ball for Duke the most are freshmen. And for them to only turn the ball over 10 times a game is extremely impressive for such a young bunch. So unless you've got another note you want to make on Zion or just their front court in general, this might be a good time to move into the kind of the wing depth that Duke has.
Yeah.
So I think it starts really with RJ Barrett, who, you know, despite averaging 22.8 points per game, has not really been his full self this year. You know, he's leading the team in usage percentage. He's taking up a lot of possessions, you know, almost at a Russell Westbrook or James Harden level. 35.
And I think you really saw that in the Gonzaga game as they went down the stretch.
Yeah, he's eating up possessions. And look, he's their best player, I think, right now, you know, given high school careers and just kind of taking the entire, you know, career of the player into account. He's probably their best player at this point. So he's earned the right a little bit to kind of be that guy, but it has not borne itself out in the efficiency. His true shooting percentage is under 50, which is awful. His effective field goal percentage is under 46, which means he's getting less than 1 point per field goal attempt, which, you know, again, is not great, especially when compared to Zion Williamson and Cam Reddish. So when you have a guy that's using that many possessions, you know, maybe Indiana just hopes that he stays cold. But when you have a guy that's using that many possessions and is not being efficient, if you add that up, you know, those missed opportunities, those empty possessions, you add that up over the course of a game, and that could be an area where if he has another off night against Indiana, could be an avenue to success for the Hoosiers.
Right, and as you start to look defensively at who Indiana is going to stick on him, it's so unclear who the right choice is here. With you know, because if you stick Juwan Morgan on him, then you're probably giving up some size against Bolden inside.
Oh yeah.
And to be honest, I think Indiana desperately needs Zach McRoberts back on Tuesday for this matchup.
I was going to say that. We don't know if he's going to play yet. And yeah, I mean, to me, he's an absolutely vital piece because, you know, Al Durham has played really well in McRoberts' absence. He's been a really nice addition to the starting lineup. But RJ Barrett is 6'7" and powerful and strong and quick. And then there's Cam Reddish to deal with. And so they've got so much size on the wing that even if Al Durham plays his tail off on defense and is executing and contesting shots, he just doesn't really have the size to guard either of those guys. And so then you put Romeo Langford on one of them, and the other one, either Reddish or Barrett, is just going to be left to feast on a smaller player. And so that's obviously not ideal for Indiana. And neither McRoberts nor Romeo Langford is really big enough to guard either of those guys, but they can at least give them a good look and kind of bother them and make their shots difficult. Whereas I think if you don't have Zach McRoberts, you're sticking a guard on RJ Barrett, and that's just not going to work out well.
Right. I mean, it almost begs the question, would Indiana, even as well as Durham has played since he's entered the starting lineup, might they be better off sticking Evan Fitzner in that lineup just to kind of spread out the size a little bit more?
Yeah, they could even try Deron Davis maybe and let him match up with Marquise Bolden, and then you kind of just slide everyone down a position and, you know, let either Justin Smith or Juwan Morgan guard someone on the wing. But then you get into
that's if Davis is up to playing those minutes.
Right. But then you get into the problem where maybe Juwan Morgan isn't quick enough to stay with Cam Reddish off the dribble. And, you know, you get into switching and, you know, you just have a speed disadvantage rather than a size disadvantage. So there's really no great answer. I think all of this is to say that Duke is a really difficult team to match up with. But I do think Zach McRoberts would help Indiana a lot. And I might even go so far as to say that Indiana probably can't win this game unless Zach McRoberts plays and plays well and is able to give them like real minutes rather than just being kind of a shell of himself out there. And again, we don't know what his status is right now. We don't know how he's feeling. He had that back injury that kept him out. My instinct is that he would play only because it doesn't seem like it's a super severe back injury. And we probably...
He did dress and warm up against UC Davis, didn't play. So that at least suggests he's heading in the right direction. And just given how important he is in this matchup, I agree with you that I think if he's able to play, I think they're going to try and run him out there.
Yeah, I would agree with you. And so, you'd figure that Romeo Langford would probably guard Cam Reddish. And he was a guy that, isn't quite on the level usage-wise as RJ Barrett, but has had, in many measures, a much better season. He's been much more efficient from the field, isn't scoring as much, but takes fewer shots and is, making more of them. So he's shooting 43% from three this year, which is an excellent mark. And opponent three-point shooting has been an area of struggle for Indiana in the past. They've tightened it up a little bit this year, and they're really going to need to continue that trend of holding opponents to cold nights from behind the line. They're really going to need to continue that into this Duke game, particularly on Cam Reddish, to have a chance to win.
Right. Reddish is their best three-point shooter, and just it's another weapon in Duke's huge arsenal of weapons out there, and they can just create so many different looks to throw at a defense. And really just you talk so much about the way that how important it is how Indiana kind of handles screenplays, and I think that's going to be huge in this game just because of there's a lot of mismatches that Duke would be able to exploit if they run a lot of screenplays with Tre Jones.
Yeah.
And Reddish could be the benefactor of a lot of those plays because say you have RJ Barrett at the top of the key and Tre Jones comes and sets a pick there, Barrett drives into the lane, Romeo comes in to help out, and suddenly Reddish is wide open.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think in a lot of situations I'd say, well, you just trap the screen or give a hard hedge and get the ball out of RJ Barrett's hands or out of Zion Williamson's hands. But Duke just has so many weapons that if you're forcing the ball out of one star's hands, you're just putting it into the hands of another star. And so they just have, like you said, they have so many weapons, guys that can beat you that, the ball screen point is a good one because I am very interested to see what they do there because, again, you can't just see these mismatches. You can't just allow them open driving lanes, but you also worry about their spot-up shooting. Tre Jones has been really good shooting the three this year as well. So you play him off the ball.
He doesn't shoot it as much as a guy like Reddish. He's only taken 11, but he's made 6 of them. He can shoot it. Jack White can shoot it off the bench. They have shooters. Yeah, so you force the ball out of RJ Barrett's hands, for instance, and that's either leading to a Zion Williamson roll, a Cam Reddish spot-up three, or a spot-up three for someone else, or maybe a straight-line drive from someone on the perimeter in a 4-on-3 situation. So it is a quandary for Indiana, to say the least, and really I don't know how the best way to approach that is. And I think my guess would be that we'll see them do multiple things throughout the game. They'll start out playing, I would guess they'll start out probably hedging the pick and roll, playing their conventional pack line principles, and then depending on how Duke is shooting, depending on how effective IU's defense is over the course of the first 8 to 10 minutes or so, they might change things up, might go to a more of a drop look and kind of play the pick and roll more conservatively. Maybe they start switching, which is something that Archie Miller has hinted at this team may be doing, and I think they have the personnel for it. Maybe this is the time and the team that when it's right to break out that scheme and just kind of see what you have in that respect, because maybe the best way to stop Duke is to switch. And I know you'd probably be giving up a few pounds to Zion Williamson in the post if you switch someone like Romeo Langford onto him, but given the other weapons that Duke has, maybe that's not the worst of all evils for Indiana. Right. It's everything with defending Duke is just such a pick your poison because Duke has so many different ways they can kill you that you never may be picking the right choice. It's just you kind of got to hope that whatever you choose doesn't end up killing you in the end, but you may just have to live with whatever you choose to try to allow Duke to do.
Yeah. Let's kind of flip things around and focus on how Duke might match up with Indiana, because I do think Indiana is the sort of team where they're going to give even good teams, something to think about as far as how do you match up with Juwan Morgan and how do you contain Romeo Langford, because as good as Duke is and as offensively talented as their best players are, they're young and they haven't played many college basketball games, and they could be vulnerable on the defensive end, though they have the skills and the physical tools to be good defenders. I don't think you see it as consistently with young players like that. And given the offensive talent that Indiana has, and they've got some pretty good shooters in their own right, even if they are a little bit inconsistent. That could be a pretty tough matchup for Duke as well.
Yeah, the offensive key, I think, one of the many offensive keys, I think, for Indiana in this game is Morgan's ability to hit the three. Morgan shot the three ball really well against UC Davis, and Marquise Bolden is not the best guy at closing out on shooters. And Morgan, if he's able to hit the three consistently against Duke, that's a big weapon.
Yeah, and I wonder if Duke will put Zion Williamson on Juwan Morgan. I think that's what I would do if I were Mike Krzyzewski, just because Justin Smith isn't really going to, stretch out behind the three-point line and take you off the dribble and kind of beat you from the outside in. He's more of a stand in the short corner and get drop-off dunks kind of guy. And he can be useful as a cutter and kind of moving around the perimeter. And so maybe, he could use his speed and kind of exploit guys in that way. But I'd be more worried about Juwan Morgan if I were Duke. And I think I'd probably put Zion on him because you don't want Marquise Bolden running around, closing out, trying to keep up with Juwan off the dribble. I just don't think that's something that he can do. Whereas Zion Williamson, maybe his best defensive attribute is his ability to guard on the perimeter for such a big guy. And we know how Juwan Morgan likes to, kind of put his shoulder into guys on the block. If you do that to Zion Williamson, you're not really going anywhere just because
right.
he's so thick and wide that it's just hard to move him. So I think Justin Smith is just a little bit easier cover. And then if Juwan does try to stretch the defense and make plays off the dribble, Zion's pretty quick and can slide his feet. The one area where, I think as athletic as Zion Williamson is and as good as his length is and his physical attributes and everything, he's not quite as good of a rim protector as his abilities might suggest. So I think Indiana, their game plan is probably just going to be to put as much pressure on the basket as possible because Marquise Bolden, same kind of thing. He's not like an elite rim protector. He's big and he's got some size and some athleticism, can block some shots. But I think if you attack the rim enough, and Romeo Langford is just so good at getting into the lane and getting to the basket, I think that's probably the area where Indiana's going to find success, is just getting into the paint like they've been doing all season. Get into the paint, attack the basket, get to the free throw line, and kind of bludgeon the other team and grind out a victory rather than spread the floor and shoot a bunch of threes.
Right. That might be the offensive key, is just attacking, just consistently getting pressure on the inside. And I think that's a big reason why Gonzaga was able to pull out the win the other night against Duke. I think Rui Hachimura and Brandon Clark were just consistently going in on those big guys, not really showing fear. And that's the biggest thing. I think Duke defensively, they rely on Zion Williamson and all their big guys just kind of scaring opponents away from driving into the lane. And if teams are really able to do that, teams will be able to get to the foul line a little bit. They'll be able, it's not going to work out every time, but the best that Indiana could hope for is for Romeo Langford or Juwan Morgan to replicate what Rui Hachimura did for Gonzaga.
Yeah, and to that point, I think, you mentioned kind of the intimidation factor, how Duke wants to use their athletes to kind of scare guys out of taking shots at the rim. I think Romeo and Juwan are crafty enough and kind of fluid and able to improvise enough where they can get those guys off balance, because Zion Williamson, he wants to sell out for blocks. He wants to jump and swat your shot off the rim or off the backboard, and same with RJ Barrett and Zion and Cam Reddish when they do protect the rim, which is, that's not their primary function on defense, but that's what Zion wants to do. He wants to get up, he wants to, swat the ball into the stands. I think Juwan in particular and Romeo for a freshman is really good at this too. They're really good at kind of changing speeds, getting into the lane and keeping defenders and particularly shot blockers off balance so that they can create space, not necessarily by virtue of any move that they do, but just kind of that unpredictability factor can keep guys on their toes. So that could be something that we see Indiana use to their advantage. And the other thing is, if you're getting to the free throw line, you're putting the other team in foul trouble. And if you can get Zion Williamson to pick up 2-3 early fouls, get him in foul trouble, keep him on the bench, that's a potential All-American that's not playing against you, that you're keeping off the court. So that as much as anything might be Indiana's primary focus, is just giving the ball to Juwan Morgan, letting him work inside, and just seeing if you can get these guys into foul trouble.
Right, and I think Duke overall has done a pretty good job so far. Pretty good job so far this season of not really getting into foul trouble. You look at that Gonzaga game, and Reddish was really the only guy in foul trouble for Duke.
Yeah,
he finished the game with 4 fouls, but Williamson only had 1 foul all game. Jones only had 2. Barrett only had 1. And while driving into the lane can pick up fouls, I think Gonzaga also was able to just make a lot of their shots going into the lane, as opposed to necessarily picking up a lot of fouls.
Yeah. One other thing I'm interested in is the Tre Jones Robert Phinisee matchup, just because it's two really smart, kind of mature beyond their years freshman point guards who are just really good at orchestrating and running the show. And again, not high usage guys, not guys who are going to score a ton of points, but have been really, really effective as freshmen and just are kind of doing their jobs. That could be a really fun matchup to watch. Just two guards who just really execute and play really smartly. Yeah,
it's that is one of the more interesting matchups of this game. Those two players are really similar. You hit on that, just the way they kind of they kind of make their offenses go, and that matchup could very well end up determining this game. If Rob Phinisee is able to outplay Tre Jones and Indiana's offense is just kind of clicking better than Duke's, that's a big advantage.
Yeah, it's almost a moot point to mention, but I will say that having Jerome Hunter could really help Indiana in this game. And obviously, we don't know totally what's going on with him, and of course, him getting healthy is the most important thing. But just having that 6'8", 6'7", long body to match up with some of these Duke wings would have been really, really valuable for Indiana. But that said, I think
even Race Thompson as well.
Yeah, just kind of athletic. I wonder if we see Jake Forrester at any point. Just as
recent
kind of
history would suggest no.
I think probably not. But I'm trying to just think of guys off the bench who might be effective, because this could be a game where if he plays, McRoberts and Romeo Langford and Juwan Morgan and Justin Smith all have to play 35, 38 minutes. And Archie Miller, he's said before that that's too many. He doesn't want to play his guys that much, and they need that depth to kind of be clicking on all cylinders and keep guys fresh. But man, against this team, I just, if you don't have Romeo and Juwan and Justin out there at the same time as Zion, RJ, and Cam Reddish, I just don't know who matches up with those guys and how you contain them.
Yeah, I think Fitzner could be a key in that sense. I'm not sure that this is really a Demezie Anderson type of game. So
yeah, maybe you just say, hey, go guard Cam Reddish, don't let him touch the ball, and because he's got some tools, he's got some length, some decent athletic. He's not the most athletic guy, but he's okay there. Where I think he lacks a little bit is just the defensive awareness, like getting over screens, knowing where and when to help, and just kind of being in the right place on defense. He's kind of struggled with this year, and part of that's just him being a freshman. But maybe if you just go out there and say, hey, don't let this guy touch the ball, just stay in front of him and just kind of simplify that assignment, maybe he could be effective on defense. But again, it's just, you don't want to have to put your faith in Demezie Anderson to be a lockdown defender as well as he's played this year. You still don't really want that to be your second or third option. You'd like to have some better alternatives there.
Right. And that's just another reason on the growing list of reasons why it's really imperative that Zach McRoberts is available. Yeah. And another kind of point in this realm is that Duke is a top 50 team when it comes to getting to the line. Top 50 in the nation. They're not a great free throw shooting team, but if Indiana doesn't get, also another key for side note, another key defensively could be Devontae Green if he's able to play.
I was thinking that too. Yeah,
but especially with the way Duke is able to get to the line, Indiana needs to be careful not to get into foul trouble.
Yeah, I think if Juwan Morgan, if he repeats what he did against Arkansas, just picking up those 2 quick fouls, Indiana might be sunk. And, I think in that scenario, Archie Miller would probably put him back in the first half. He said after that game that he kept wanting to put Juwan in, but he felt like the score was close enough that he could afford to keep him on the bench. I think if the game gets out of hand, Archie would just go with his best guys and say, if we foul out, we foul out, but we've got to stay in the game. But, that said, you don't want to be in that situation. You don't want to be in a place where you're playing tentatively and you've got to keep guys out of the game to prevent them from picking up fouls. You'd like to see your guys, be able to kind of play hard and play free. And early foul trouble can just really put a damper on a team's aggressiveness and their confidence because they just feel like they're always in danger of having to be yanked out of the game and not being able to play at full strength. So yeah, that's a good point. And Zion Williamson is as big as he is. That guy just barrels into the lane and attacks the basket and almost forces you to foul him. He's either going to dunk it, lay it up, or get fouled. He kind of just, puts that choice on the defender. So that's going to be tough. And then I think it probably goes without saying that Indiana's got to limit the role players, the guys who come off the bench, the spot up shooters, the kind of lesser, the Alex O'Connells of the world. You've got to keep those guys under wraps because that Zion's going to get his, one of RJ or Cam Reddish is going to get his, if not both of them. And so you just maybe have to hope that Tre Jones and Duke's other role players aren't able to really get going.
Right, Tre Jones, Jack White, Alex O'Connell, just those shooters that could kill Indiana. If those guys get going, I don't know that Indiana really has a chance.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And especially in that environment, I think that's another thing that's worth noting is they're playing in Cameron Indoor Stadium. And as much as Indiana's used to playing in a loud environment, it is a different thing when that noise is being directed at you rather than at your opponent. And that Cameron is maybe the toughest place to play in college basketball. Assembly Hall's definitely up there as well. But man, I think that environment, I tend to think that stuff like that can be overrated sometimes just as far as swinging the outcome of an entire game. But there's definitely an effect. And, Indiana's a mentally tough team. They're a poised team, a confident team. But even for the best teams, there's a reason that home court advantage matters. And so especially if Indiana gets down early or maybe gets in some early foul trouble and that crowd is really able to get into it and you just feel like your back's against the wall the whole time, that's a completely different circumstance to play in than if you get up early and you feel like you're in the game the whole time.
Right, and there's the stat that we mentioned on our preseason episode where Duke has only lost 6 home games over the last 5 years, all ACC games. So no non-conference home losses in the last 5 years. It's really a tough place to go play, tough place to go win. Very few teams go and win in Cameron Indoor. Yeah.
What is this? Let's win or lose. What does this game mean for Indiana? We'll start with if they win. Does that dramatically alter your perception of this Indiana team?
No, and I think that might be a big motivator point for Archie Miller. Just the fact I don't think Indiana really has much to lose from this game. I think obviously getting blown out let's say they get blown out in Durham, that's obviously not a good look, and they'll have to rebound from that. But you can also look and say they're the top team in the country, and they're the number one team in the country, even after losing to Gonzaga, who is also one of the top teams in the country. Yeah. Losing. There's no shame in losing to a team like this in an environment like that. And so I think people aren't really going to say, "Oh, Indiana is done." It's a big opportunity in a non-conference game, but if they lose this game, it doesn't really hurt them in their resume. It's just kind of a missed opportunity to gain something. It's not like something that's a knock on their resume. But then on the other side, they have a whole lot to gain from that if they are able to find a way to win.
Yeah, I think as much as anything, a win would just kind of, it would obviously be an indicator that, to the outside, the public, the fans, that Indiana's good. But I think they're a confident bunch, but I still think that getting a win against a really elite team like that has some internal boost. That can really bolster a team, even one as confident as Indiana appears to be. That can provide some validation. That really, if you beat a great team on the road, that's kind of an indicator to yourself as much as anyone that, hey, we're really good. We can be. This is how good we can be, and then just kind of a measuring stick to keep judging yourself by the entire season and kind of the standard that you set. And I think it's important to set those standards early in the season and just kind of have something to play up to the rest of the year. But I'm with you. A loss to me, unless it's just an ugly, bad, one-sided, sloppy game, I wouldn't really take too much from a loss from Indiana. Obviously, it's going to be disappointing for fans if it happens, but as far as material takeaways from it, I don't know that there would be much to glean there. I think it's probably more you look at the process, you look at the execution, you kind of just judge individual things for what they were rather than the entire picture of the game.
Yeah, I completely agree, and it's just I really think Duke is the team with something to lose in this game. That's not as much Indiana. It would unequivocally be the best win of Archie Miller's tenure so far at IU, and even for Duke, I mean, if Duke was to lose this game, I don't know that this would necessarily be a bad loss for Duke. Yeah, but I mean, I think Duke has more to lose than Indiana does.
I think so too, and that's part of the downside maybe of playing at home is you get that home court advantage, but you also have this pressure on you where if you lose to a team that's ranked lower than you and that you're supposed to beat at home in that environment, then that might be a signal that you've got some things to fix and some stuff to tighten up. Rather than a team that loses on the road in a tough environment can kind of chalk that up to external factors maybe. So, yeah, no, I'm with you. And I also think that Indiana is going to be good enough by the end of the year that win or lose, Duke, this is either going to be a quality win for them or it's going to be a loss to a really good team. Because I do think Indiana will end up being one of the 15 or so best teams in the nation. And, a loss to a top 15 team is nothing to be ashamed of. And certainly getting a win over a top 15 is something to feel proud about.
Definitely. That's exactly what I've been saying. It's a chance to add something to your resume, and it's not the type of thing that's going to losing this one game will not keep if they lose this one game, that's not going to be the thing that keeps them out of the NCAA tournament.
No. Last question for you: could Duke beat the Cavs?
I'll say this: I think the whole could the best college team beat the best pro team, I think it's more realistic in basketball than any other sport. With the way it's with the way individuals can take over a game. Yeah. That being said, I hate these.
No, I agree with you, and my answer is no. I think it's a silly question, especially in light of the fact that Duke recently lost to Gonzaga. And I don't think anyone would say Gonzaga could beat the Cavs. That's a whole different can of worms. But the one thing I will say is if there is one team for whom the answer to this question might be yes, it's probably that 2015 Kentucky team. They didn't win the title, but they had Karl Towns, Willie Cauley-Stein, Devin Booker, Trey Lyles. They had legitimate NBA players all on the same team. I still don't think that team would have beaten an NBA team. It is at least not this year's Cavs or this year's Hawks or whoever you want to decide. But they could give them a run for their money. I will say that much. There are certain college teams that maybe a handful in the course of the entire history of basketball, but there are a select few out there that I do think could give a terrible NBA team a run for their money.
Yeah. So
this Duke team is not one of them, though.
So I have one more point I do want to make about this game.
And go for it.
I'll ask you a question. I think a key that we haven't really touched on yet for Indiana is rebounding. Because Duke is one of the best rebounding teams in the country. They're third in the country in total rebounds per game. And I think but on the other side, Indiana has the top field goal percentage in the country at 55% as a team. They're third in the country in effective field goal percentage. And that could really be a key it's tough to say if Indiana's been playing at home every game except for the Arkansas game, and this is going to be the toughest place they've played so far. They did shoot still pretty well in Arkansas, but if they're able to hit shots at a high level like they've been this season, that might be a key defensively, honestly, because a lot of what Duke creates offensively comes off defensive rebounds. And if the Indiana's making these shots, they're not allowing Duke to get out in transition.
That's a great point. And rebounding and field goal percentage are often, kind of intertwined, because the more shots you miss, the more rebound opportunities there are going to be. The more shots you make, the fewer rebound opportunities there are going to be. I actually remember talking to Paul Millsap a few years ago about this. I asked him about the rebound differential because they'd been badly out-rebounded. And I was like, what do you guys have to do to fix that? And he just looks at me and he goes, make shots. And at the time, I didn't really understand why he would give that answer. I thought he was just being, terse. But it's a good point, because, the best way to keep your opponents off the glass, keep them from getting rebounds, is to make shots. Because the more shots you make, the fewer defensive rebounds they're able to get.
Yeah, I agree. So give me what you think would be Indiana's most important concept key to this game, and then give me one IU player who you think is the biggest key to this game.
For the player, I'll say Romeo Langford. You could really pick either of Juwan or Romeo, but I'll say Romeo because he, I think, as much as any Indiana player, just has this undeniable ability to get buckets, and he's done it against some bad teams. He's done it against some pretty good teams, but he hasn't done it against a great team yet. And that's because he hasn't had the opportunity. And so this is really his first chance to prove himself as a bona fide, immutable scorer against a great team. And also, I think it's worth noting that Romeo Langford there are going to be a lot of scouts at this game. There are going to be a lot of people watching this game. And I don't think that's lost on Romeo Langford or Zion Williamson or RJ Barrett or Cam Reddish or even Juwan Morgan for that matter. So I do think that that could factor in. And I think this is a good proving ground for all those players who are kind of gunning to be lottery picks in the upcoming draft. I think that's something that has to be taken into consideration. But as far as it pertains to Indiana, I think for them to be at their best, for them to win at the highest levels, they're going to need someone who can just score at any moment, just get a bucket. And to me, Romeo Langford is the best candidate to be that guy. And so for that reason, I think, it would be a really encouraging sign if he's just able to manufacture some offense when Indiana's offense, if and when it bogs down, and you just have him kind of create something out of nothing. If he proves that he's able to do that, that would be really encouraging for Indiana. And then as far as the conceptual, I think the 3-point shooting, the opponent 3-point shooting, is going to be maybe the biggest indicator, because Duke has guys that can let it fly. They have guys that can get to the basket, but I think 3-point shooting as much as ever is just a good barometer of overall team defense. If you're not allowing opponents to take a lot of threes and you're making their looks difficult, I think that generally bodes well for defensive success. And if you're able to, hold your team to a below average mark in 3-point attempts and in 3-point percentage in a given game, I think you generally have a pretty good chance of winning that game. So I guess I'd say that. But, like we touched on at the top, this Duke team just presents so many matchup problems and so many strategic quandaries that even if you do so many things right, even if you do 75% of your game plan, you execute it to a T, they can still beat you just because they're that talented.
Yeah, good points. My conceptual key, I think, in short, is just don't play scared.
Yeah,
I think don't let the environment get in your head if you're Indiana. And specifically in game, don't be afraid of Duke's size. Gonzaga showed, as we said, Gonzaga kind of showed that the key, maybe the flaw in this team is just if a team is not scared of driving in, then Duke might be a little more susceptible than people think. And I think Indiana just needs to not play scared, not be afraid of going in on guys that might be a little bigger.
Yeah.
And my player who I think is going to be key, I'm going to go a little outside the norm, just because obviously Juwan Morgan's key, obviously Romeo Langford's key, but I think to win this game, to have any chance at winning this game, Indiana's supporting cast is going to need to step up much more so than they did in the last week. And so I'll pick a player kind of from that group, and I'm going to pick Evan Fitzner.
Okay.
Because of the way he lit it up against Marquette. He was one of Indiana's best shooters, one of Indiana's best players really against Marquette offensively. And if he's able to have that type of a game on the road at Duke, that's huge.
The concern I have about Fitzner, I think that's a good point because he's maybe Indiana's best floor spacer at this moment. But the concern I have about him is we saw this in the Arkansas game where he just wasn't really able to get into the flow of the game and really make an imprint because that was such an athletic game and he's just not really an athletic guy. And that's fine. That's not his game. But I do think that this Duke game is going to be a really athletic game. Like if you are not quick enough to defend, your guy and stay in front of the ball and hang with the athletes like Zion Williamson and RJ Barrett and Cameron Reddish, like if you're not a good athlete, I don't know that you're going to be able to hang in this game. So, Fitz, that'll be the big question for him because he could either play 5 minutes and not really be effective, or he could play 20 minutes and be a crucial piece as a shot maker. And if he can just manage on defense, he doesn't have to be great, but if he can just kind of tread water and survive on that end of the floor, I think that helps Indiana tremendously. And to kind of tie in your point to what we started the podcast with, as far as not playing scared, I think that's where it kind of loops back to Justin Smith because we talked about his importance as a defender and being able to play with physicality.
All right. Well, you got anything else?
That's all I got. That's all we got for this episode of The Matchup. Indiana takes on Duke on Tuesday night, the biggest game to date of the season. I think one that will – I'm really hoping it's a good game. The last thing I want is a blowout in either direction. I just want to see, a competitive game where we get the best of both teams.
I agree. I'm really looking forward to this.
Yeah, I'm and you'll be at the game, right?
Yes, I will.
You will. I was not able to secure a place in Cameron, but I will be watching from Bloomington, taking diligent notes, tweeting occasionally. So keep up with both of us on those platforms. Seth will have a notebook posted to InsideTheHall.com after the game. Stay posted on all of that. Stay posted for every episode of Podcast on the Brink. Following this, every episode of The Matchup, we will be back for most big games, most kind of marquee matchups over the course of the season. And until then, we'll talk to you all later.
If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.